Hello and welcome to Coach's Corner Health. If you're new to our channel, welcome. And if you've been with us for a while, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, what it is, what it can feel like, where it comes from, and more importantly, what we can do to manage it when it rears its ugly head, especially when you're in the middle of stepping outside of your comfort zone, like most of us, and trying something new or going bigger with your dreams and goals. Hi, I'm Leslie Godet, self care specialist for female entrepreneurs and professionals who need to incorporate more self care into their life and business so that they stay sharp, focused, and wake up with more energy and intention to tackle their daily activities with confidence. Andy, tell us who you are.
Thank you, Leslie. I love your introduction. It's wonderful every time.
Thank
Hello,
you.
everybody. I am Andy Lidstone. I am the unconditional coach. I help people with boundaries and control issues. And today's conversation can be a part of that. Imposter syndrome. That's an interesting conversation. It's an interesting topic, and it's one that a lot of us struggle with, and we don't really talk that much about. I mean, we in the coaching industry do, and many people in artistic endeavors do, but people in their normal everyday lives don't even acknowledge this a lot of the times. And I think that's something that we could use. We could afford to have more conversations around, and that's what the purpose of this one is. So I'm glad we're digging into this.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
why don't you tell me a little bit about your experience with imposter syndrome, and I'll tell you a little bit about mine.
Yeah, and first, before I get started, imposter syndrome can show up in any area of our life. It doesn't have to be
Yes,
professionally, it can be your personal life, right?
yes,
Especially if you have people in your inner circle, whether it's siblings, whether it's your parents, you're trying to like live up to them, whether it's, anyone that like friends that you see what they're doing something with their life and you feel like you're trying to keep up with them but start feeling like you're an imposter because it doesn't really align. And that's okay. I want you
yeah,
to really recognize that it's okay that if it doesn't feel right to you, it doesn't have to be something you pursue. So I wanted to be able to put that out there. For me, imposter syndrome really has been not so much around my personal life, but more around my professional life. So, especially when it came to not what I'm doing today, being a life coach, because I feel like I'm very confident in what I do, and I've really like honed my skills, like making sure that I'm learning all the time, and the reason why I'm learning all the time is so that I can better myself for me, but also for the people that I work with. For me, where it showed up was really in my professional life as it pertained to working in the legal industry, especially when it became more specialized in the job that I was doing. So when it was, working in a corporate environment, especially in Canada, where I started my legal career as a legal assistant, most of the time in that environment, it wasn't necessarily that it was a specialized position. You just had to be good at, taking dictation or using the dictaphone and learning how to transcribe to making being very aware of being organized to being good at using your time well, to also editing, proofreading and things like that. Really where it became more personalized for me in that I started to feel like an imposter was when I first stepped into the world of title, meaning I started to work for a title company down in Florida when my husband and I moved to Florida. And a few months later of being in Florida, I ended up getting a job with two lawyers who ran a title company. And what they did was they ran title searches. They did, they worked with real estate companies where they closed residential loans. So there was the searching of title, the reading of title, the creating of performas, the creating of the documents, and then the after part, the creating of the policies and things like that. Learning how to do all of that became specialized because it was more in the world of what a paralegal would do. So immediately I was introduced to paralegal work, and I was all about it because I thought, yeah, this is great, learning something new and stretching myself. I'd always been that person. But where I found it became really that imposter syndrome started to show up was when, well, two things happened. Uh, One, I was given more responsibility, and I felt extremely nervous about it, and then started questioning and doubting my abilities, and then feeling like I really was an imposter doing my job. Like I really didn't really know what I was doing, because then I started to, as I said, the self doubt came in, and I started asking the questions to, questions that I already knew the answer to, but as if I forgot somehow. My mind would go blank, and I'd have to, like, when that happens now and again, my mind will go blank, and that's okay. That's a normal thing that happens. But it was to the point where I didn't trust that I knew the answer, even though I knew the answer, but I didn't trust that I knew the answer. So that's when
Right.
imposter syndrome started to, and that was one of the first times when it first started to rear. After maybe about three, almost, I stayed with them the first time for 4 years, and then I transferred away for a couple of years, and then was back with them for another 3 years. But in the first sitting with them, of being with them for like the first 4 years, it started to show up around after about 3 years of working with them. So that was my first, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah.
introduction to feeling like I was an
And
imposter.
yeah, that's interesting because for me it was the other way around. The more I worked for a company, the more confident I felt. The more I worked in an industry, the more confident I felt. For me, the imposter syndrome started up at every time at a job interview, and it didn't matter if the job was for, some really high per industry, or whether it was for, some what some people might call a dead end job. It didn't matter what the interview was for. I felt like an imposter going into those interviews because I felt like I didn't have any skills,
Hmm.
even though I clearly did have plenty of skills. They brought me in for interviews because they saw my resume and liked my resume, so clearly I had something they wanted. But I felt like an imposter every time I went in for job interviews. I felt like I had to prove myself in some way. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized, look, I don't got to prove anything. They like who I am, and if they don't, then they don't have to hire me. Like, we both get a choice here. Both they and me get a choice to work for this people, right? It's a relationship. So for me, it was, and that was if of my personal life too. If I was starting a new relationship with a new girlfriend or something like that, I rarely ever approached a girl. I almost never um, initiated any of the relationships that I had. Um, it wasn't something that I felt confident to do, especially early on in my life. I felt like I didn't deserve to be there. I felt like they were looking for somebody else, and I they were looking for. Even when they did approach me, I still felt like I didn't deserve their attention. So I had some serious self-esteem issues when I was growing up, and as a as I got into older years, I started to realize what I do have to offer, both as an employee and in a relationship, as a friend, as a life partner, and all those kinds of things. But when I was in my teens and 20s and 30s, I really doubted whether I had any worth at all. Which is part of the reason I was suicidal for so many years, because I didn't feel like I had anything to offer anybody. Um, so for me, the imposter syndrome came out when somebody saw something good in me and I didn't see it. I would be
Hmm.
applying for jobs that I didn't think I deserved, even though those jobs weren't necessarily high class jobs. And God forbid that I would get headhunted for a new industry. I spent a lot of years in retail. And one of the jobs that I had in retail, I quit to go into an entirely new industry, into technology installations, because a recruiter saw my resume online someplace, thought I would be great for this other job in a completely unrelated field, and they pitched me to their client, the employer, and the employer loved me. and I'm like, what skills have I got even like related to this? And so you know, and then I went into an industrial industry a few years after that, and I still like, what did I have that indicated I might deserve this, right? Like it just didn't. Every time I went into a new industry, every time I went into a new job, every time I tried a new adventure, or every time I tried a new relationship, meet new friends, anything like that, I felt like I didn't deserve it. Felt like it wasn't good enough. Um, right up until the lady I eventually married, like she approached me and she initiated the whole relationship, and it really put the relationship on a different standing than what I would have been comfortable with had I had some confidence in the first place. So yeah, for me, imposter syndrome showed up the first when I was starting anything new. Once I was in it for a while, once I was doing the job for a while, once I was in the relationship for a while, once I had settled into kind of a pattern, I felt reasonably confident. Um, but it took me a while to gain that in each and every situation. So for me, it was in the initiation of new things. Even when I decided to become a writer, and actually, interestingly enough, much like what you said, when I decided to become a life coach, I didn't have that issue because I'd already been helping people for decades by that point. I just didn't recognize it and I didn't know what it was. Once I recognized what it was, I'm like, wait a minute, I can do that professionally, right? So I did, and like you said, with life coaching, I had no issues at all. I just got into helping people, and it changed people's lives. So, but yeah, my experience with it was in initiating new things. That was my experience with it. So yeah, interesting. It's an interesting contrast from your experience to mine, in that yours was in ways in situations and in jobs that you'd been in for a while and you'd used to, and you started to doubt yourself. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so as I said, the first time it came up was when I'd already been doing something for a while. I think I did have that transition into uh, it it showing up in the beginning, but that was because of an experience that I had working for someone who was a verbally abusive employer, and I wasn't the very first person that he'd been that way with, but I was trying to get my foot in the door, working in a new state in the U.S. and needed to get some tenure, I guess you could say, within the state. Not necessarily that I'd already been working as many decades by that time, but it was because I was in a brand new state, and every state has its own requirements. People have their own requirements. The one thing about the US is that a lot of what they do is that they want you to be specialized, even in a corporate environment, as well as, like, of course, litigation, because there's a lot of like court dates and things like that, filings. But when it came to like being in corporate in Canada, I didn't really need to worry about that. It only became more more of a requirement when I did step out into industries that were more specialized. So again, the first time was in Florida, being working for a title company, and of course I did that for many years until I ended up working for a company that was a structured settlement company. And there really was no fear there. I always believed that I had the ability, the skills. But I think, especially when I'm starting something brand new, I always did, because it was something new and exciting and I wanted to learn. So I put myself full into it. I wasn't afraid that I wouldn't succeed. But I think it's when I did end up working for this person, that's when I first then it switched my imposter syndrome feelings to, going into it, finding a new job after I'd had enough. And I felt like I'd put in enough time to actually have at least some tenure in the state. But then realizing I can't go longer than that, because if I do, my emotional and mental wellness was at risk. So I ended up finding another job, but in the very, I would say, the first 3 months of being in the job, I felt less confident about my abilities and was looking for permission to perform normal tasks like sending emails, like the wording in my emails. I've always been confident that I pay attention to, because I believe words matter. And so reading through my emails before pressing send to make sure that it's going to land the way I anticipate as best I can on the other side. But when I worked for this individual, there was the restriction of not being able to rely on my own skills and asking for permission. And so that really was hard. I had to learn, rebuild my confidence level so that I didn't feel like an imposter going into a job, because that's when I felt like, am I even worthy to have this new job? Am I good enough to do this because of my past experience? And that was just, of course I knew where that came from and I had to work through it. And of course I've been able to do that because I've been with this same company now for it'll be 7 years next month, working for them full time 2 years, and then now for the past 5 years in this capacity as an independent contractor, which now it's my own business by contracting my services to them.
Right.
So it really was like it went from one to the other. But I think I think a lot of people have, I like how you explained your experience was not fully feeling confident when you first got started. I think that's probably how most people feel about when they start something new, because you don't know, you're unsure, you can't see the road ahead, and you want to make sure you do everything right. But I think because I felt like in my situation might be unique, might not be, but for me, I just know I've always had that level of confidence. But and that's only in professional. I'm not talking about my personal life. I've not always
Right.
been confident in my personal life, but in my professional life, uh, that I've always had that confidence until I've been maybe asked to do something different within a role that I've already created success in, and now I'm asked to do something different, and that's when the imposter syndrome can kind of show up, because then
Right.
I feel like there's almost that resistance to
Right.
doing it, thinking like I can't do this. I'm already talking myself out of it. So that's been my experience.
Yeah. And to your point about whether or not this was you know something that people feel early in an experience or whether it's something they feel after they've done it for a while. I know as an artist, I spent good 25 years writing fiction, and I published a couple of small places, but I didn't really get a lot of success. I was a part of a writers group for a few years, and it about art is a lot of artists feel that imposter syndrome after they've been doing it for a while. A lot of artists, when we first start out, we're confident because we have these brilliant ideas and these great things we want to do, and we're like, and nobody's ever done what I'm doing before, and clearly nobody has because I've been consuming this art for decades and nobody's done what I wanted. So, and then we get into doing it, and we do it and do it and do it and do it and do it, and we start getting reasonably good at it, and that's when we start comparing ourselves to other artists of the same type, and we go, I'm never going to be as good as those people. You know, we're writing our first or second draft of our third novel, and we look at Stephen King and Michael Crichton and and these people doing it for decades, might look their lives, and we go, I'm never going to be that good. Well, of course you're not going to feel like you're going to be that good because you're writing your first or second draft, and what you're seeing from them is their final edited and published manuscripts, things that have gone through several iterations of editing by themselves and an editing team. So of course you're never going to look that good. It's like comparing your home movies to a Hollywood movie. It's never going to look that good. But those Hollywood movies, when they're being filmed on set, they look a lot closer to your home movies than you think. Those novels that those experienced writers write, they look a lot closer to your bad writing than you think. Um, So a lot of us artists, that's where we would feel the imposter syndrome later on, is after we've actually gotten past those initial stages of thinking we can do something, and we start to feel like, wait a minute, I can actually do this. I'm starting to feel good about my writing. And then we start to compare ourselves with people who are really actually good at it. When we start to when our dreams go from, some naive pipe dream where we think someday we're going to be a famous author, and then we start to realize that, wait a minute, that's actually possible, and we start to believe that it's really a thing. That's when the imposter syndrome steps in, because, like, wait a minute, how can this actually be a thing when clearly I'm nowhere near what these other people are like? And and uh, and that comes from comparing their finished product to our rough draft product. And don't what is it, an expression I heard? Don't compare your backstage to their production.
Mm.
um, because when you compare your backstage to their production, you're never going to measure up. But if you compare your production to their production, or your backstage to their backstage, you'd be surprised how similar some of that stuff is. That was some of the best advice I got from some of the most famous writers I know. So it's imposter syndrome is a real thing, and it does show up. After you've been doing something for a while, it does show up when you've first been doing it. It can show up at any point in your career, at any point in your relationship. I know in my marriage, I started getting imposter syndrome when she started, um, when she started, being my when my ex-wife started being very involved in the church. After we've been together for several years, she started getting very involved in the church. And when that happened, I started feeling like, wait a minute, I don't want to show up in the church that way. I don't feel like I'm capable in that way. So it was much the same way, right? And it can show up later on in the experience. It can show up at the beginning. It can show up at any point. At any point where you feel like, wait a minute, what do I think I'm doing here? So yeah, it really is I don't think it's unique to you that it shows up later sometimes, especially after we've had somebody browbeating us, after we've had somebody really calling into question our work quality or our characteristics,
Yeah.
right?
I
So
love that. And
yeah,
I love what you said. Don't compare your backstage to their production. Like, I think that is like brilliant. And the reason why, because it's so true. Like, this actually happened to me recently, and I told you about this. I've been a coach. I am really confident in my skills as a coach, but I started getting a lot of women coming into my life recently who are like, I'm maybe say at this level, this is what I'm thinking, and they're way up here, and I'm thinking to myself, why am I coming into, look, why are you inviting me into your circle? Clearly, I'm not there yet, and yet
right,
that was that little bit of, not necessarily, it is that self-doubt, but that, because I felt like, how do I fit in there? I'm an imposter, meaning I don't fit into the same category as you.
right,
And when you said that just now about don't compare your backstage to their production, and that your backstage could be similar to their original backstage, and look at it from that perspective, or even some of their qualities of their life, that's not necessarily where they want it to be. And there's something about my life that really resonates with them, that helps them feel like, okay, I feel confident now because I've added this additional, person to support me. Or your production, like something good that you do. And uh, then comparing it to their production. Yeah, they might have produced more than you have, but the quality of what you have that's produced could really still be on the same level as the quality of what they produce at a different level, because, and they're bringing you into that circle because they feel like you have something that you can add, some quality that you can add. So I love that you brought that up, because this whole feeling like you don't especially like it's another way of saying it, like you don't belong.
Yeah.
um it's like you belong. When I started realizing to myself, one of the things I had been saying is like, I don't belong. Well, I do. I belong wherever I'm invited to participate, then I belong to be there. And I think that's just, it's hard sometimes to wrap your head around, but say it enough times and you start believing it, and have enough people in your life that are like that, are coming into your life inviting you to participate. You start believing it, and then you realize, oh well, yeah, I do belong wherever I'm invited. I belong. And
Right.
and everyone has their own imposter syndrome, feelings, around. And it could, even like, I'm sure some of the biggest life coaches out there in our industry feel some level of imposter syndrome at some point in their business, and that's just because they're human, right?
Right.
We all feel.
We
And
all
so
feel it.
there, and we might be going through something in our lives, so we have emotions that sometimes will kick in and maybe trigger that imposter syndrome, you know thought process. So yeah, I love
Right.
that you said that. It's like one of my favorite things now. Thank you.
It wasn't mine. Like I said, it was given to me by an author that I was following. Actually, I heard it from two or three different authors that I follow. But you're welcome. It's a great piece of advice, and it really points out to the unfairness of the judgment calls that we make that create this imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
We judge ourselves based on factors that are not fair. We specifically intentionally choose factors that are not fair, that are against our favor, because we're looking for ways where we're not good enough. We're looking for ways that we don't measure up, especially those of us who have had or do have low self esteem or trouble creating self esteem. We do look for ways that we don't measure up. And when we find them, and they're easy to find if you look, um, especially when you're not even comparing apples to apples, like when you're not comparing what you're produced and to what they've produced, or what your back end looks like to what their back end looks like. Ernest Hemingway, one of the most famous authors in history, used to write drunk in the back hallway, in the back stairwell of a hotel, because he hated being at home. He hated being around people. He hated writing. So he would do it completely smashed. But he produced some of the best work ever written, right? So even his own imposter syndrome was incapacitating. So much so that he had to do so drunk. Um, this is not a unique story. There's stories like this all over history of people who hated what they do so much, or mistrusted what they did so much that it often incapacitated them. Some of the most brilliant people in history were incapacitated by their own skill sets, by their own abilities and talents. So this isn't unique. However, what is unique is now we have support systems that we didn't have then, that we didn't have even 40, 50 years ago. We have life coaches, we have support systems, we have mentors, we have people who are willing to work with us to get this stuff, to work through this stuff. People, even friends and family, can help point to actual skills that we actually have, actually work that we've actually produced, especially an artist. But even in your personal life, even in your relationships, in your friendships, one of the most self-sabotaging thoughts that we have is, I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be in this relationship. I don't deserve this friendship. I have clients saying that to me on almost a daily basis, Why do you help me so much? Why do you spend so much time serving me? Why do you, especially my free ones, are like, why do you do this for free? Um, because I love helping people, because I'm here to help people, right? Now I only have so many free slots, but I'm still helping them, right? And I still have clients who don't understand why a person would do something like that. They feel unworthy of what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is my choice,
Mhm.
right? I have a client who I've been working with for 2.5 years, and he still struggles to ask me for help because he still thinks that he's using up too much of my time. And that's after 2.5 years of helping him. We all deal with imposter syndrome, all of us. At some point or another, we all have a version of it. We all think about it in some way. So my my challenge for anybody who has this thought is, look at what you're comparing to. Are you comparing your messy bedroom to somebody else's show home? Because I mean, ask yourself, is that fair? Right? Are you comparing your home with 4 kids to your grandmother's place where her husband had been dead for 4 years and all there was her and she kept it immaculate? Like, are you comparing apples to apples, or are you comparing, like, is it even a fair comparison? I'd be willing to bet that almost all the time it's not. Even when you're comparing to your own history, like you would do when you started doing that other job, when you were doubting yourself. Even when you compare to your own history, are you comparing who you are now to who you are then? Are you in the same mental space? Are you in the same intellectual space? Do you have the same skill set? Are you doing the same job? Or is there something about it that makes it a little bit harder? Right? We make these comparisons, but we never actually test the fairness of these comparisons.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I think we use comparison too to beat ourselves down. It feels like it's, oh, well, I told you so. I couldn't do this job very well. I knew I wasn't going to be good enough for it, but I did it because other people said that I could. And now I have the proof that I'm not good at it. So, I'm going to just, and I'll compare myself to somebody else. Well, the reason why I can't is because I don't have X, Y, and Z. And look at that person over there has this. It's like when we can't compare ourselves, like you said, apples to apples is one thing. Apples to oranges, anything that's opposite completely to what we are. Like, again, like you said, having someone, if you, I've known millionaires who literally drive junkers, okay?
yep,
Because it's not important to them. I mean, I wouldn't say junkers, but they drive old cars. Why? Because that's not important to them. A status symbol. So when you see your neighbor driving down the road in a brand new Mercedes, are they living at the top of their pay scale and they're pushing it to the max? Or are they really able to afford that? So are you comparing yourself to that person because you don't know the backstory?
right,
Like I said, I've known, like when I say millionaires, I'm talking multi-millionaires, and they have old cars. So
yeah,
would if I had say they drove a 10-year-old car, and it was, I'll just pick like a 10-year-old Toyota Camry. Not that they're horrible cars, because they're great cars. I used to have one. But say that's that car, and then you decided, well, I want a brand new whatever. I want to drive a Jeep, so I want to buy a brand new one, and of course put myself in Hawk because now it's like my payments are like this. So are you going to compare yourself as this person who now you're living at the max, and you don't even realize that this person who's driving this 10-year-old car is really a multimillionaire because they've recognized that stuff doesn't matter. So comparing yourself to other people doesn't work anyways because it only makes you feel worse, especially if you're comparing yourself thinking you're not good enough or you don't belong in the same circle. Like I said, I have had many women who are extremely successful coming into my life lately,
right,
and I'm not yet there, but that doesn't mean that I don't belong. And I've
Right.
recognized that. And that's just through having conversations with people that I know that care about me, that care about my well being, you being one of
Right.
them. So it's not allowing myself to compare that where I'm at today. My back end could backstage could still be similar to their backstage. They just make a little bit more money than I do. Or
Right.
my production could be just as good as their production. They just make a little bit more money than I do. So
Right.
there's that whole thing is like comparing ourselves to where someone else is at. The only person, and I wouldn't even say compare yourself to who, to yourself. I would say the only person you should focus on in the things that you do is you. Like, don't worry about what everyone else is doing, and don't worry about like how other people view you. But it's, you know, the when you start looking at other outside external things to decide like if you belong somewhere or if you're worthy of something, like you said, your clients are asking you, why would you coach me for free? It's because I can, and because I love to help people. And so even you might not have as many free slots available, I'm the same way. I have some slots available that I support other women because I truly feel that I want to provide someone with the tools that they so desperately are asking for and are willing to show up for. And so why wouldn't if I've got something that will powerfully help them, why wouldn't I do that? Even if
Right.
they can't pay for it. And that's, because it's not about it's we both of us recognize it's really about helping other people. It's coming from that place. So the imposter syndrome piece can show up for all of us, I think, in different ways, like personally and professionally. But it's like, how do we like let's talk about that before we start wrapping up. Like, how do we deal with that?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. As you've already mentioned, it's looking at what you're comparing to. That's the first step. Look at what you're comparing to, and like I was saying a minute ago, is it a fair comparison? Um, because it almost never is, and even when it is, there's ways that it's not. So you're not looking at an exact duplicate of the situation you're in, and because it's not an exact duplicate of the situation you're in, like you said, you don't know their backstory, you don't know their background, you don't know where they're coming from, you don't know what circumstances they have. You know, maybe something has happened to give them a boost. Maybe they're not the overnight success that you think they are. They've put 30 years into this already. You just don't see that other 30 years or the other 29 years. Like these are the things that we don't think about. Um, and even like you said, when you were comparing to yourself, even comparing to yourself isn't a good thing, because we're still not fair about it. We're not saying, well, yeah, but before I had an ability that I don't have now, or before I had a stability that I don't now have now, or I have a support system that I don't have now, or I had something that has happened to me since then that has reduced my ability to do what I used to do. Right? It's really difficult to continue being a Olympic level runner on one leg. Right? You're not going to be able to do what you used to do if something has changed. Right? So it's a matter of, it's not even about comparing yourself to who you used to be. Um, so I don't like comparing ourselves to other people. Now, if you want to look at other people, I'm not saying you shouldn't keep an eye on what other people are doing. Don't use them to measure how bad you are. Use them to inspire you to get better. Use them to show you what's possible instead of what you can't do or what you haven't done yet. Use what other people have done to show you what's possible. When I look at life coaches and I see Jack Canfield and Tony Robbins and some of these other guys, I'm like, yeah, I'm not there yet, but damn it if I'm not on the way. Like, I plan to be that, like those guys, right? So it's not that I'm feeling inadequate compared to them. It's really that they're showing me that this is possible. I can do what they're doing, and I want to. So it's not the same as comparing. It's looking to them for inspiration, right? So we can look to other people for inspiration. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're comparing where you're at now to where they're at now, and when you're comparing your messy website design to their, professionally commissioned, network of websites, yeah, it's going to feel horrible. But if you paid the same people they're paying, the same price that they're paying, you'd probably get what they have. Compare that. And 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 again, like you said, where the other solution is focus on what you want. If you're going to compare yourself, which is the only comparison that's even reasonable, and even that I would, as you mentioned, be very careful with. If you're going to compare yourself, compare where you were when you started to where you are now, because guaranteed you've made some progress. So look at the progress. Don't look at all the backsliding you did or all the things that you messed up or all the mistakes that you made. Look at all of the progress and only look at the progress, because that's the only fair comparison, is the progress. None of the other comparisons are fair. None of the other comparisons will help you. And that's it. And then inspire yourself to move forward, because there's something more that you want. You're not done yet. Keep going. Unless you've drawn your last breath, and if you have, you're not watching this video. Unless that's what happened, you got lots to do. Keep going. So
Yeah, I
that's
agree.
my version of the solution. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just want to add to what you said. I think it's, finding out there, like looking at other people to get inspired. But also, if there's something that you want to do that has really lit you up and you're looking to other people, it's not necessarily comparing yourself to them, but looking at what are they doing and what is it that you think is missing that you can add. Because I think that's part of it is like, okay, so someone does this type of, let's say, life coaching, but there's something in the industry that's missing that I know I can bring value, that I can really bring value to help other people. How can you do that? By being inspired by what other people are doing. And maybe they might be in the same industry as you, and maybe they're not covering parts of the path that you really think is missing that you could add value to. So that's another way to do it. But also, like, get inspired to see like where you're at. Like as Andy said, looking at where you were is really, I think, is a great thing to do, is to like look at where you were and to where you are now, because it shows you your growth. And don't look at all the things that you didn't do, like that you fail or that you failed at, but look at it as like learning, a learning phase, like things that you learned that didn't work, that, or things that you learned that partially worked, and now you're thinking, well, I could look at that again and revisit and upscale it to, like looking at like the way that you used to be and how you are today. It will have changed over time, because we, as we get older, we do change. And then look at all of that and think, well, how can I, and then looking at other people, seeing like, well, what are they doing, even if they're not in the same industry, to get inspired, like people that you admire that can help you say, oh, like, okay, this is what I want to do. How can I be inspired by these people so I can look to the future of who I want to step into being? And I think that's really important. Like Andy said, he wants to be up there, thought of as one of the top, if not the top guy in the industry in what he does. Well, I mean, honestly, I don't know of anyone else that does what you do anyways. I've never heard of another person, approaching boundaries the way that you do. So yeah, right now you're in it, I believe, in that space by yourself, which is a great thing.
Mhm.
So what does that look like? Being able to just like get inspired by other people, but get inspired by who you were and the growth that you had, even the ups and downs. I mean, you look at our inventors, like looking at, this is an example, the light bulb. He looked at it as not failing 10,000 times. He looked at it as looking at 10,000 times that it didn't work, so that he could then keep going, so that we now have light, right? Light
Right.
bulbs. The same for the telephone, the same for like computers, like those guys that in the beginning started writing code, and what would that look like for people like us to be able to have what we have, these personalized machines that we can take anywhere we go and we can work from anywhere we live. Or look at the internet, being able to stream live to you today Andy and I are in two different countries, and yet we're coming together to stream live to you today. The power of the internet, the power of social media to connect people.
Yes.
So looking at what other people, what you've done, and all of the things that did work, that didn't work, to where you are to date, and then looking what other people are doing to inspire you to keep moving, to keep doing, to keep living your life. Because my ultimate goal, and I'm sure Andy can agree with this, is at the end of your life, especially I know at the end of my life, I want to be able to look back and say, wow, what a ride. Like I did so many things. I might not have, delved into a lot of the things that I actually thought I would like to. But man, what a ride. All of the things that I did do. I'm so excited. The life I lived, I truly lived my life,
Yeah.
and I have no regrets. And that
Yes.
is really, truly what I think this is really about, what we're the messaging of why we do what we do, so that you don't have those regrets, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what I just wanted to add.
Yeah. Yeah. And I already look back on my life and look at some of the exciting and sometimes stupid things that I did and go, I'm so glad that I did those things. Right.
Yeah,
Hitchhiking halfway across the country, including walking through the mountains in the dark. I mean, who wants to do that? But I'm glad that I did because it gave me an experience that few people get to share.
yeah,
Right. And and I agree with you. How do we get over imposter syndrome? We we do shit. We try things. We get out there and we experience life instead of trying to make it about right or wrong. Make it about, is this what I want or is it not what I want?
mhm,
Am I doing something I enjoy or not? And if it's a not, then find you something you enjoy. Try new stuff until you find something you enjoy. Just keep trying new things. You'll find things that you enjoy in places you'd never expect. Um, how to cure imposter syndrome? Make a fair comparison, if such a thing even exists, which I would doubt most of the time it ever does.
yeah,
Um, it get out there and do new things. Get out there and experience what life is like. Experience what relationships are like. Experience what friendships are like. Experience what jobs are like, or careers are like, or being an entrepreneur is like, or skydiving, or scuba diving, or race car driving. Like any of those things that you thought you might want to do, try them, or at very least try a virtual version of them. Right? Get out there and experience something, and see what it feels like. Like experience something, try something, build something, create something. Whatever it is that you want, or whatever it is that you think you might want, or whatever it is you think you don't yet hate, do all those things. And that's where you'll discover you're not the imposter you thought you were. You're a full, unique human being with inspiration, with talent, with skill, with love, kindness, compassion, and sharing. You have something nobody else has. You're not the imposter. Everybody else is bad at imposting you. They're bad at
yeah,
impersonating you. They can't be you. Nobody else can be you. So do that to the best of your ability, and you will never be an imposter.
yeah. I love that. Well, on that note, want to thank you all. Thank you all for tuning in today. We appreciate your support. I hope that you found value, and I hope that we answered your questions. However, if there's another question that you would like answered around this topic, please feel free to write that into the chat. Reach out to us and let us know, because we definitely love being able to chat with you, and to be able to share what we've learned over the last few years of our lives, and give you our perspective, but also to have that conversation. So if that's you, reach out to us, with any questions. If you know someone who needs to hear this message today, please share the video. Let's get the word out and let other people, recognize that they are not alone, that they do belong, and that they are a unique, beautiful individual, and that is okay. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Andy, is there anything else that you'd like to add before I turn off for the day?
I think we've about covered it. Thank you for that wrap up. Yeah, and like Leslie said, just share this around. Give us your comments, your questions. We'd like to hear from you. We like engaging with our community, and just be uniquely you, the best you can be, because nobody else can do you the way you do. And we love you, whoever you are and however you are. Right the way you are. That's what we need right now. What our world needs right now is who you are. Thank you for that. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Thanks a whole
Yeah.
bunch, Leslie. This is a wonderful conversation, as they always are.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you too. Have a great rest of your weekend. I hope you have fun enjoying time with your family and friends. Have a great rest of your week. And we will see you next Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Have a great day.
Bye bye, everybody.